Welcome, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are. It is very good to see you all. I am Abi Dauber Sterne, Director of Makom at the Jewish Agency for Israel. We're going to get started in one more minute. I see a bunch of people who are coming in, so I'm going to give it one more minute and then we're going to jump right in. Okay. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. I'm very happy to see everybody today. As always, welcome to the Makom Salon. Tonight, I will be your host, Abi Dauber Sterne, and I want to give a shout out to my co-host Johnny Ariel, who's hosted many of the previous salons, and it's been an honor to share this space with him. So thank you. So I'll start with a little bit about myself. I'm, as many of you know, a Jewish American Israeli who has spent much of my life back and forth between the US and Israel. And so, as you know, the Makom Salons really are about this conversation between Israel and outside of Israel, usually North America. So I'm really excited tonight to have this conversation, to hear about our speakers' stories about finding their place, finding the place where they live, or finding their place in the place that they yearn to live. And so tonight I'm going to welcome Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, who is the senior rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue in New York City. He was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary and subsequently earned a PhD at the University of Chicago Divinity School. He serves on boards of several organizations, and he is the author of 11 volumes of sermons and the editor of Jewish theology in our time. And I can only imagine that actually written sermons these days, written and recorded, are the way that many sermons are being given. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that soon. And our second speaker tonight is Dr. Nisreen Shehada. But I'd like Nisreen to say her name so we can hear it said properly.
That's close enough, actually. Nisreen Shehadi.
Shehadi, thank you.
You're welcome.
She is one of the founders of Standing Together, a joint Jewish-Arab grassroots movement fighting to transform Israeli politics. Standing Together organizes Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel around campaigns for peace, equality, and social justice in order to build power and transform Israeli society. Nisreen has a PhD in chemical engineering and nanotechnology. Not anything I know anything about, but that'll be interesting to touch on. Works at a large high-tech company and lives in Haifa. So with that, as we often do, I'd like to ask you, Mani Shma, how are you? What's the mood in which you're coming into the salon, given the pandemic's upcoming elections, past elections, current affairs? I'd love to hear from you first, Nisreen. Tell us how you are.
Trying to be optimistic. That's generally what I try to do. Things are tough, not only because of the pandemic or the elections. We're having some struggles here. I'm not sure how much you guys have heard of the recent demonstrations against organized crime and the lack of action the police takes. We're coming out of a pretty difficult weekend where one of the demonstrations ended up with several people in the hospital, one put in a synthetic coma because he was so battered by the actual police. So there's a bit of a crisis or a bit of an issue here, but trying to keep spirits high, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping it real. Elliot.
Thank you, Abby and Nisreen. It's lovely to meet you, and it's great to share this time together with everyone here. Mostly names I don't know, but one or two names I do know. So it's good to see friends, new and old. Look, this is a moment they didn't teach you about in rabbinical school. So aside from personal health and my family's health and concern for the welfare of humanity, public health, but also the economy and the fractures within our society that have been rendered even more evident by way of the hardships of COVID. I think, we're doing, I personally, professionally, am trying to do the best that I can to keep a community. You made mention, Abby, of what communal life is like at this moment. The synagogue is a house of worship. In Hebrew, it's a Beit Knesset, a place of gathering. And what does that actually mean in a time when people can't gather? So when you ask me, Ma Nishma, how am I doing? I would say, on the one hand, it is probably the loneliest moment of my career. All of the things that fuel a rabbinic career are not happening. The interactions that make us who we are as rabbis, as communities. On the other hand, it's Park Avenue Synagogue has a voice in leading a conversation, online, education, worship, and otherwise, that I think has been a source of strength for many North American and, frankly, Jews around the world.
Wow. Yes, thank you for that. Maybe while we're there, Nisreen, do you want to just say a little bit how the pandemic has been affecting your work? I'm particularly actually interested, maybe say a word about your professional work before we get to your volunteer work, which we'll talk more throughout, but I'm interested to just hear what you do professionally and how the pandemic, if it's affected it.
Sure. So I work for a high-tech company, as you said. If I might throw some swear words at you, but like, don't take it personally. I'm kind of used to starting talking, then people giving me the glassy look and like, where are you coming from? What are these things? But generally, I work for a company that was used to called Mellanox. It's an Israeli startup, recently sold to the American NVIDIA company. So now we're part of a big corporate, which is kind of takes some getting used to, but we work at communications. We mostly develop high-speed communication solutions in hundreds of gigabytes, like nothing for house use, it's more for data centers and commercial companies. As a communication company, you can imagine that you would think that we have good communication solutions for these times, but even we struggle with that. We work from home mostly, apart from a very small lab team or lab crew that works on site. The last year, I've been pretty much cooped up between these four walls, exactly, morning to night. The plus and the minus in this situation is that we have the ability to work from home, but there are no limits. We're working 24/7 pretty much. So yes. That's in terms of my professional career. In terms of the work of standing together, actually, we've had a very busy year. Not only did we have, I think this is the fourth election in the last 3 or 4 years, in the last 2 years.
National election.
Yeah, exactly, the national election. We had a local elections 1 year prior to that. So it's kind of like one set of election after the other. We're not involved in the election itself, since we're a non-partisan organization or a grassroots movement, that we have people from different parties and different political views within the spectrum of our beliefs. We try to keep it, not very narrow, to try to bring in as many people as possible. So we've had, but it's a time of high political interest. So we're trying to cash in on that and to take advantage of the fact that people are paying attention and they're more involved than usual. And apart from that, obviously, the pandemic brought us a lot of opportunities in terms of really highlighting the issues and the problems that we've been vocalizing for several years now. And everything just became so much more clear and so much more evident in the aftermath of the pandemic, not necessarily because of the health situation, but more because of the social and economical crisis that it brought along with it.
Right.
And it really highlighted the fact that we don't have the appropriate setups and the appropriate infrastructure to be ready for such a situation.
Well,
which we've been saying for a while now.
And that's certainly been true
very
worldwide. Yeah,
exactly.
Thank you. So I'd love to hear maybe first from you, Rabbi Cosgrove, about when and where do you feel most at home in Israel? It feels a little bit surreal to move from the conversation we're just having about pandemic realities, but I'm going to push us to talk about when and where you feel most at home in Israel, and what maybe makes Israel your homeland.
Well, can I just can I backdoor into that conversation, because in terms of the question of I'm well aware of with whom I'm speaking, and as I'm listening to Nisreen, I'm also thinking of the last year of my own life and the subject of Homeland and the connection between Israel and diaspora. I don't know what to do, Abby, with this data point, but I just feel compelled to share it. Since the beginning of the pandemic, I have not given one sermon about Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning,
which is rare. Which is rare for you, I take it.
You know, if you look through the last 11 years of at Park Avenue and before then, rabbis are on a rotation, and they, and to the degree that a connection to Israel is part and parcel of Jewish identity, which is what's behind your homeland question. Right. I think the issues that Nisreen is touching on, socioeconomic, political, the urgency of those issues in a North American setting are sort of, Park Avenue Synagogue it's actually a somewhat eclectic community in terms of its political leanings vis-a-vis Israel, some more progressive, some more conservative, small c. It's a conservative synagogue as far as denominational affiliation. But I think for a variety of reasons, both in terms of the issues we're facing here, the urgency of speaking to those issues, as well as North American Jews trying to figure out Israel right now and where we stand vis-a-vis Israel in the 4 election cycles, in the news of the last 24 hours, vis-a-vis Reform and conservative Jews, which represent a large majority of North American Jews. We're not really sure what to say, and we're not really sure what the relationship is. And if lack of speaking is an indicator, that's a deafening silence right now.
Wow. So you're saying you're not sure what to say. And is that, that sounds both like a professional and a personal sense of what can you say about what can you say about what Israel looks like as a homeland? What can you say about what Israel looks like?
For me, and here I'm speaking both personally and professionally, there is no separation between my Judaism and my connection to Israel. Mm-hmm. Meaning it's all one and the same thing. It's not just halachic observance, faith, a sense of global peoplehood, but it's a connection to a land. And so when I'm in Israel, I feel at home, right? Whether that's loved ones, family members, geography and location, or a sense of history that I am part of a story that long preceded me, that in my own personal biography, there are formative moments and years of my life that have been shaped by way of being in Israel. And now actually my children some of them are in and out of Israel, living there. And so they are building their own sense of connection, whether or not that leads to living in Israel or not, is, that story is yet to be told. That said, I think right now we're a little confused, right? those points of engagement, the physical contact, going back and forth, how can you make sense, I'm throwing a lot. So Abby, you shut me up when you need to.
Say another sentence or two, and then we're here, but we'll come back to you.
How do we make
Great.
sense? I, as a conservative rabbi, denominationally, right, on the one hand, I celebrate the news of the last 24 hours of conversions in the high court being recognized by the Supreme Court. I'm not unaware, though, that this is also going to be used as a rallying cry of the right-wing religious parties as to who can bash progressive Jews more in order to buttress their bona fides on the right wing.
Yeah.
And where does that leave me as someone who's already struggling to articulate something intelligent and supportive to say about Israel, when the would-be elected leadership of that country are going out of their way to put my expression of Judaism down?
Wow. We're going to come back to that. That's a lot. And I imagine, Nisreen, you're going to have a lot to say also from a very different perspective.
I might have to give a sermon on Israel this Shabbat.
I'd like to read it. Please send it our way. That will be a must read for everybody who's listening today. So, Nisreen, I'd love to hear your take on where you feel most at home in Israel.
At home. It's kind of like weird, but pretty much it's my home, for the better or for the worse, in the good times and in the bad. This is where my family is. This is my friends are. This is my roots. I kind of I can't really specify a certain place, because even like in the worst of the situation where, and things can be, bad, but still it's home, and if I didn't feel at home, I wouldn't be here. So despite of all of the struggles and the imperfections and the improvements that we have to make here, this is where every time I go to see my grandmother, and she tells me about the stories of her childhood and the play, and we walk around the city. We used to walk around. We drive around now. She can't walk much anymore. She's an 80. Yeah. Yes. So she's an 80-something-year-old lady, so she can't walk much. But we drive around, and she points to this corner, that corner, and tells me all sorts of funny anecdotes about her growing up. I feel at home, so it's kind of hard not to.
Well, so I'm happy to then transition to the next question of, when don't you feel at home in Israel? When do you feel foreign? And I'll just, without putting words in Rabbi Cosgrove's mouth, I'm going to want to hear from you, Nisreen, first, but I'm just thinking about what you just said, Rabbi Cosgrove, of the the inability to even speak about Israel in some ways. It certainly sounds like some kind of foreignness happening there. And so we'll come back to that, but it's just echoing in my head. Nisreen, so tell us about when you feel foreign and disconnected.
I'm trying to keep things light, but it's kind of difficult. It's a difficult topic. It's enough to turn on the news and to hear the hate rhetoric and this nonstop attempt to make me feel like a stranger in my own home, like I don't belong, like an outsider. Every time I hear the phrase demographic threats, I have this little twist in my stomach. So plenty of that going around. Every time I see a police officer or a soldier, I feel threatened. And even, it's nothing logical or rational. It's just an emotional gut reaction. But those times I feel foreign.
Does it feel different now than it used to? Have you seen any changes?
It gets worse. It's gotten worse. it's gotten worse. I can't really pinpoint if it's gotten worse because I've become more aware of the political complications. My parents worked very hard to shelter me through my childhood, so the political awareness is relatively new for the last few years. So I can't really tell if it's because of that or because things have, really gotten worse objectively. So I'm leaving that as a caveat, but things do, in my sense, feel worse.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's okay. We might get heavy at points. And
right.
Can I ask? Am I allowed to ask Nisreen a question?
sure.
Because I'm here in North America, and I'm just when you say it's getting worse, is that the political climate? Is there more of a physical threat to the Israeli Arab population? Like, I actually don't know what you're talking about when you say it's getting worse. If I could just ask you.
Sure. So it starts from the top, right? It always starts from the top. So whenever you have political leaders in the country allowing themselves to vocalize or be more vocal and more open with hate rhetoric and with racist comments, it drills down to the streets, right? So even if a police officer wouldn't have dared to do something a few years ago because there wasn't the sense of the political backup, they do that now. They feel more comfortable. If people in the streets, brats, where there are plenty of those going around, used to be more careful about the things that they say or the things that they do, fearing reactions. They're very loose now because there will be no reaction, and everybody knows that. So you hear more hateful words in the streets. You have the ultra right wing or the right wing activists being more violent, and as a person that goes to demonstrations, then I feel more physically threatened. Like, on several occasions I was run down with bats, and my car was smashed or tried to smash my car. Now, I'm kind of a coward, so I kind of avert conflict in those situations. Like, I run. In the fight or flight situations, I usually flight, and still, it wasn't enough, and I was attacked. So I don't like. It starts from the top, but it's definitely, drilling down to the people.
That's interesting, because what you're describing, we use in America, we've used the same language about that, all the things that you wouldn't say in polite company prior to the Trump administration, right? The box was sort of pulled off, and certain unspoken things were now spoken, and especially when they're being spoken from positions of authority that grant or that bad behavior isn't disciplined, it gives permission, it makes a new normal.
Yeah.
And we've been using the same language on our side of the ocean, Nisreen, for that. And I can't relate because, I was just listening to a podcast only slightly more popular to this that we're on now with President Obama and Bruce Springsteen. And I think we're about head to head here, but there was a line, I forget whether it was Obama or Springsteen said it, about your skin color being destiny. And the idea that, right, Nisreen, this foreignness question, or not feeling at home, right, is part and parcel of your identity. For me, right, I can take my yarmulke off, I can walk into the street, and I'm just another straight white male here in New York City, and I can pass and leave all my, other Jewish identities apart. it is, Abby, to answer part of your question, right? You know, I feel in a very different way and a less acute and urgent way than Nisreen does for physical safety, right? The values that I hold as a liberal Zionist of being of concern for the other, that I was once a stranger in a strange land, that because I carry certain progressive values, including the hope for a two-state solution, including a progressive view on identity issues and minority issues and all the issues that I hold sacred, that those are not in contradiction to a robust Jewish identity, a strong Israel, a sense of where my people came from, a sense of my people's destiny, right? And I've woken up to a world where identity politics are such that you have to choose either or, that you either need to be on the political and social left, or you need to be sort of, you know, all Israel and turned a blind eye to, you know, any of the other issues that inform my identity. So anyway, so it's hard to be a liberal Zionist these days, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, lehavdil, as we say, to make a distinction, but maybe the distinction isn't so great. I'm thinking of you know, being American living in Israel and the critique that I had of what was going on under the last administration. But my love for America didn't go away. And you know, similarly, when I critique Israel, whether here I'm now living in Israel or when I was living abroad, had that ability to both love and to critique at the same time. And I'm curious, you know, if that resonates also for you, Nisreen. Like, are you able to do both, to critique and love? Right. I mean, I'm hearing from you, Elliot, that you've done, that you do both.
Yeah, that's a good question. My love is for the people. My love is for the land. Do I love the country as a country? It's difficult. It's complicated. I have times where I love it. There are times where, okay, this thing's not working. We need to start over, kind of. But then again, all of my critique, all of my work comes from a place of reaching a better reality for everybody here. So it kind of depends on how you define the country. If we're talking about, you know, citizens and land and the area, then sure, critique and love. If we're talking about the actual political, being that is now this country, then it needs serious work. With so many internal contradictions within itself that I might be the only one in this call that actually get them. So like, there are things that I can say that you'll all look at me like, what's the problem? Well, there's a problem there. Like, there's a contradiction there. Even being, I'm sorry, Elliot, but a liberal Zionist, that as itself has a lot of contradictions, since Zionism is a problematic movement, at least for me. Like, again, all of my experiences with the concept of Zionism has been bad. So definitely, yeah, it's a loaded question.
Yeah.
So Nisreen, Abby, I'm loving this conversation, but I just want to ask Nisreen. Nisreen, is there so if I define Zionism as sort of the right of the Jewish people to self-determination, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not, I know my history. I know all of the counter narratives, but is there a way that is just strictly defined as the right of the Jewish people to sovereignty and self-determination, can that exist in the Israeli Arab imagination or reality without it causing offense?
It can. It definitely can, because it's kind of well, because I translate that to the same demand that the Palestinian people are having, the right of self-determination. So it's either yes for both parties or no for both parties, right? What goes here goes there. And if you believe in the right for the Palestinians to self-determinate, then you need to believe in the same thing for the Jewish people as well. So in my opinion, as soon as a group of people or a nation want or they have a desire for self-determination, that they deserve it. And nobody else can take that away from them. It's our right as human beings, to feel safe and to be able to live in and according to the lives that we believe we want to lead. So my problem comes with not in the right to self-determinate, but rather with the way it was carried out, the injustice that was done to my people that I cannot ignore, especially like since my grandmother is still telling me stories that I'm like, that's just not right. And I'm living that now, like even today. There's a lot, it can be done better. It can be done in a way that doesn't necessarily cause injustice or offense. It's just not being carried out that way. And I do realize there's a big shift, a huge shift in the way people today grasp Zionism and what it means than the people that started this country and what's been done in the last few decades. But still, there are still things to work out. There's still points and angles to it that we see as Arab citizens or Palestinian citizens of this country that our Jewish counterparts do not.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'd love to think actually about the ways in which the partnerships that can exist between the different peoples that we each work with, what that might look like. So I'll be specific. For you, Rabbi Cosgrove, thinking about like what's the role of diaspora Jewry, of Jews, outside of Israel, in building Israel as a increasing, is a better and better country. How you see that, and then similarly for you, Nisreen, how you see the partnerships that have to exist within the country in Israel, and or with the Palestinian diaspora, if you want to see that. But also, I was specifically thinking about Israel, the work that you do in your organization of how Israelis and how Jewish Israelis and Jewish Arab, and Arab Israelis work together. So I'd love, we start with you, Rabbi Cosgrove, about what that ought to look like.
I never thought it would be a courageous stance to be just sane, but I'd like to think that the idea, that there's not much daylight between my personal position and my institutional position and what Nisreen just said, in the sense of embracing the right of self-determination of both Israel Jews and Palestinians, period. I think that's a goal that's been my life goal, and it causes me great pain to see that not actualized. And I say that out of my love for humanity. I say that out of my love for the state of Israel, that Jews should be able to live side by side at peace with their neighbors, period. That's not, to the degree that I'm able, I try to model an institution. It's a Park Avenue Synagogue's a large synagogue in Manhattan, a place where that ideal can be given voice, where different, it's not monolithic in view, that people can come together and important conversations can happen. There was a bloke named Johnny Ariel, who talked about hugging and wrestling with the tough issues. I think that is a communal model, not unique just to the Jewish Agency, but it's actually what I try to do each and every day. Is that answering your question, Abby?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is. I'll push a little more to say is there something that you think of you when you speak to your congregants, for example, is there some way of activating them to build a different Israel? Is there something that those not in Israel can be helpful with?
Look, I'm careful. I don't endorse this political party or that political party. We're not AIPAC or, J Street or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So I think that I try to cultivate a love for Israel, and I try, and I try not to dodge these tough questions. Right? I think that's also the responsibility of good Jewish education. There was a guy, I think his name's Alex Sinclair, who talked about teaching kids how to approach, maybe God didn't write the Torah, okay? The first time a kid encounters that possibility should not be in the campus classroom. It should be in a religious context with their rabbi, wrestling with that question in a safe space. I think that same way, I have that same attitude. This is not my idea. This is Sinclair's idea with when it comes to Israel education. We need to be able to address the issues that Nisreen is sharing in a context that's filled with love for Israel. So when the kids who grow up in my congregation hit campus life, the first time they see it is not when they're crossing the campus diag and someone bursts their bubble on the Israel narrative that was fed to them that is not entirely true.
Thank you. Nisreen.
Right. Well, the way I look at it is that it's pretty much what we try to do in Standing Together as well. We try to communicate to people and to really work on issues that benefit us all, regardless of nationality or religion or whatever. And there are so many. Like when we look at things, really the issues that the administration or the government chooses to work on and chooses to promote don't benefit the vast majority of people, whether they're Jews or Palestinians. Mm-hmm. So we really try to concentrate on to rally people around the joint interests that they have. And looking at that, really, when you take away the zero-sum equation that we're trying to or that the government is trying to feed us, then you realize that there is a way where we can all live together. There are miles and miles of empty places, of empty, land in this country that can be that people can live in, that can live on, that they can work, that they can improve, that they can, and survive perfectly and even prosper. Not only survive, really live and carry lives. But the government chooses not to take advantage of all of the area because of other interests that it may or may not have. A small example is what's going on in the south of the country, where there are, vast areas of empty land, and they choose to tear down Arab villages to replace with Jewish settlements or Jewish villages. And there's no reason to do that. There's none. It can easily be done in some other way. The only reason to do that is because it feeds the interest of the 1% that this country or the government actually works for. So what we try to do is we try to attack that angle, because most of the issues that we struggle with, whether it's the occupation, whether it's social injustice, whether it's racism, whether whatever we can look at, it's mostly because the government or the leadership chooses to promote specific set of interests rather than the interest of the public. I'm not sure if that answered your question, or if you want to clarify a bit, and I'll be more precise.
That was great. I'm actually going to ask you the sort of what I like to think of as the magic wand question. Both of you, if you had a magic wand, right? Thinking now we've just outlined a lot of the struggles and the difficulties that you're seeing, each of you in different ways, that each of you seeing in Israel. But if you had a magic wand and you became the president of Israel, and I mean the president, not the prime minister, the president, right? So it's probably equally unlikely for each of you for different reasons, but that's why it's a magic wand. You're the president of Israel. What would be your signature project to bring a tangible sense of home to all the residents of Israel? Nisreen, do you want to start?
I couldn't even imagine that happening. Like that's so far beyond my realistic view, like my reality, that I can't even imagine that. And the president of Israel has like zero power, right? So that's kind of problematic.
Well, I'll just
I can't do anything. So.
I'll just say President Rivlin's signature project it's called Israeli Hope, but it's built on this idea of the 4 tribes of Israel. And how to bring those 4 different tribes together. And so he, whether it's working, whether it's
it's a propaganda. You do know that, right? It's a lot of talk, very little things that it can
but
do. But okay, I'll go with you.
You have a magic wand.
If I have a magic wand, okay, this is gonna sound cliche. Education.
Okay. What, of whom, how?
Pretty much everybody, but again, I'm going to be selfish here, mostly the Palestinian minority in Israel. As an engineer, and even before, when I was in school, I really tried to go and talk to teenagers and give them lectures about what we were doing and our work and our research work, and trying to get them excited and about higher education and doing things with their lives, and I could see that they were not prepared for the kind of talk that I was trying to bring to them. They were just like their level of analysis, their level of understanding the topics that I was trying to bring to them wasn't what I think it should be. I'm not an educator, so again, everything is very subjective here. But just making a simple comparison of students that I saw from Jewish schools and from Palestinian schools, and it's a huge difference between the 2 types of school, even if in the same grades, the same classes. So there's definitely lack of investment in there, maybe even if it's just lack of control or review of what's being taught and how it's being done. But an education reform is pretty much the first thing that I would emphasize on. A project of scientific and enhancement to students and things like that. So that would be it.
And also you're saying that the equal opportunity, the equal education would enable a greater sense of home for everybody.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you.
I don't know if this is, thank you, Nisreen. I'm going to take Nisreen for 200. I agree with what you're saying. I would put it in education as well. For me, and this will be both cliched and no surprise as a rabbi, right? It's anything that can enable, facilitate two people to recognize and engage with the humanity of the other is value added. It's a little different, Abby, than your question about Homeland. But I think about what's transpiring in this conversation here. Nisreen, I don't know the last time. I mean, it's a little weird because it's COVID. I don't talk to most people, but right, I haven't had a conversation with an Israeli Arab for, I don't even know when the last time I have, right? I don't know when the last time you spoke to a rabbi in North America, right? I'm guessing not this morning, right? So
not this morning, but
okay.
not that long a time ago.
Okay. All right. So you're a better person than me.
No, it's not about that. It's
But,
just we're more, I'm the one that has the higher interest to get the message across. It's pretty much the.
So I think if that can be happening at the school level, if that can be happening in dialogue, I mean, God knows we can now do it by way. What if I was president of Israel? What if that was part of the core expectation between all of those who physically and spiritually lay claim to this piece of real estate, right? So both me and Nisreen and the settler and the person living in Gaza and everyone, and if we just realized that at the end of the day, we all put our heads down on our pillow and we all wake up with anxieties and aches and pains and worries about our children and just some way to humanize each other, right? Because right now we are all operating in our own silos. I think that if there is, and our sources of information are what we read by the media who is seeking to create more division, not less. And I don't think there's any substitute for just recognizing the humanity of another person. I might not agree with them, but at least I know that, people aren't born into this world hating other people.
Yeah, you're making me think about, maybe I'm stating the blindingly obvious, but there are many divisions, right, that we're talking about here, and the sense of distance. I mean, in the sort of Jewish educational world, there's a lot of conversation and work, and in fact, the Makom is very engaged with as well, about the sense of distance that Jews outside of Israel, particularly North American Jews, have from Israel. And a lot of it, there are many reasons why, but some of it is, because there has been a more right-leaning government for many years here in Israel, and Jews in North America tend more left-leaning politically, and so there's been a divide there. But also because Israelis themselves, Israeli Jews in particular, are not really that interested in Jews. I'm making a generalization, but it's a fairly true generalization, right? That Israeli Jews are not that interested in Jews outside of Israel. And so there's these divides that happen. Makom, in fact, my colleague Osnat is with a group of Israeli youth movement leaders right now up north near the Kinneret, teaching them about the Jewish people, broadly speaking, beyond just Israel. And from our perspective, what that does is it not only helps us here in Israel understand Jews outside of Israel, but it helps us understand plurality and pluralism and diversity, in the sense that there are others who are also very much part of us. And so similarly, I would say that there, the divisions here in Israel, right, are also between Jews and Arabs, sort of thinking about the many different, the kinds of educational interventions that we need for divisions in general. Feels really, really critical, not just in Israel, but really everywhere, but particularly in Israel. So I think both of you, in terms of like the need for education. I mean, I'm in education for my work, so I appreciate it, but I think it really, really rings true, especially today. I'm going to ask, before I ask one last question, I'm actually going to put a poll up that I should have showed earlier, but it's such a beautiful poll that I feel I want to share it with you as we're thinking about home and where we feel at home, right? There's homeland and then there's home, and those aren't necessarily the same things. I can't poll. Oh no, it's Osnat. Are you there still? My poll isn't working. Let's see if Osnat can get it up on for us or not. I'll give
There
it
you
a
go.
second.
Yes,
It's on-
I
it's
think I
on my
did.
screen.
Is it up? You see the
Yes.
poll? Excellent. So as you see, I'd love for all of you to tell us what home means to you. It's a sort of nice poetic way of thinking about what is home in more metaphorical sense.
I see that people have started voting, and I'm going to let a few more answers come in, and then I'll be happy to share it.
I have one last question for our speakers tonight.
Mm, 70% voted. Let's give it one more minute.
Okay.
This is very interesting. So I see we have 52% that goes with home is where your heart is, which, as we saw, is interesting. We have 10% who think that home is where when you have to go, they have to let you in. And 10% that think the house is made of bricks and beams, the home is made of hopes and dreams. And my home shall be called the home of prayer for all people, from Isaiah. That's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. So with that, it's a great transition to asking each of you, our speakers today, which writer most illuminate your own existential condition this time, your own thinking about home and homeland. And we'd love for you to recommend the text to all of us. So do you want to start, Rabbi Cosgrove?
So, you know, I find myself looking for texts for hope during this time. And the way my rabbinic mind works is, has there been a place where, you know, filled with despair, where the timeline is uncertain, where we are all living a diasporic existence, whether we're in Israel or whether we are outside of Israel or in Israel feeling not at home, that is there precedent for this moment? And as a rabbi, and perhaps for some people know, that this is what prophetic literature, this is what Isaiah and Jeremiah and, you know, all dealt with: a population that was displaced, a population who didn't know how long their displacement was going to last for, and a population desperately searching for hope in less than optimal circumstances. So, you know, Yirmiyahu 29, when the people are in exile, and Jeremiah says, "Benu vatim v'shevu v'nitu ganot v'ichlu et pirian," that you should build houses, live in them, plant them, build their gardens, and redemption may not come now, but we have to make the best of where we are in exile, and hope that that day does come. I find that the text of the classic prophets very much speak to me today.
Oh, thank you. I've been thinking but we really could use a modern day prophet. And so maybe it's not a modern day prophet, but maybe it's to go back and read and to read the ones we've got. So thank you for that. Nisreen.
I'm more into ordinary people doing ordinary things that have extraordinary consequences.
Uh-huh.
So that's what I enjoy. I read a lot of books from very different authors, mostly biographies and autobiographies of very ordinary people that do things that seem unimpressive, like opening a coffee shop in Kabul, or you know, going to the police and filing a complaint of harassment or sexual assault, and things that to most people seem, you know, uninteresting, but have very huge consequences. So I first recommend everybody to find the unknown, unfamous writers that speak about their lives and read them. Usually that's much more interesting than the very famous books, at least that's from my experience. And I think I'll actually go with the very famous, and I'm sorry again for being very cliche here, Edmund Burke quote. I'll change that a bit, as I am a feminist after all. The one that goes, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing." So let's get off our asses and do something so evil doesn't prevail. That's pretty much my message today.
That sounds like modern day prophecy to me.
God, no, I'm no prophet.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate also your willingness, both of you, to really get into some of the harder issues. I know that not everybody listening agreed with what was said, and that's really important for all of us to engage with and hear.
Yes. Is it okay if I say something about that? A very short statement from my point of view. We will never agree on everything. We'll all have disagreements. I don't agree with myself half of the time, and I'll have to have internal arguments here and there until one part wins. I think that what we need to work on is accepting the fact that we disagree, and not to make an enemy out of everybody that has a different point of view, because that's not necessarily the case. It's okay to have different point of views, to disagree, to even have very harsh arguments with people, and still, you know, coexist.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and actually Makom is doing some work on arguments and what does it mean to have an argument? How do we have conversations about the most difficult issues? And so again, thank you. I really appreciate your candor and willingness to have a real conversation. In 2 weeks' time, we're all invited back again. Our next speakers will be Rabbi Angela Buchtal and Irina Nevzelin. I'm talking about identity. And as always, if you have feedback, we would love for you to fill out the survey that's in the chat box. It helps us think about the next sessions and what else we should do and how we should always improve. With that, thank you all very much. Good afternoon and good evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. And thank you for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.